Κυρία Πρέσβη του Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου, κύριε Διευθυντά της Βρετανικής Σχολής Αθηνών, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, κυρίες και κύριοι, με χαρά σας καλωσορίζω στη διάλεξη της καθηγήτριας του Πανεπιστημίου του Sheffield, κυρίας Angie Hobbs, η οποία διάλεξη εντάσσεται στις φθινοπορεινές διαλέξεις κλασικών σπουδών που οργανώνονται από κοινού από την Βρετανική Σχολή Αθηνών, το Ινστιτούτο Κλασικών Σπουδών του Λονδίνου και από το Ινστιτούτο Ιστορικών Ερευνών του Εθνικού Ιδρύματος Ερευνών. Πριν από 3 χρόνια έγινε η πρώτη διάλεξη και ακολούθησε το 2016 η δεύτερη. Σήμερα έχουμε την τρίτη. Διαπιστώνουμε λοιπόν ότι δημιουργείται ένας θεσμός ο οποίος προωθεί τις αρχαιογνωστικές σπουδές και βέβαια την συνεργασία των επιστημονικών φορέων μας. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω από τη θέση αυτή τις συναδέλφους στο Εθνικό Ίδρυμα Ερευνών, την κυρία Σοφία Κρεμίδη και την κυρία Μύρινα Καλαϊτζή, οι οποίες ανέλαβαν την πρωτοβουλία, προσπάθησαν και επέτυχαν αυτό το αποτέλεσμα να έχουμε σήμερα την διάλεξη, την προσκεκλημένη από το Πανεπιστήμιο του Sheffield και να είμαστε όλοι εδώ. Ειδικά θα ήθελα να χαιρετήσω τον Διευθυντή της Βρετανικής Σχολής, κύριο Τζον Μπένετ. Δυστυχώς, ο Διευθυντής του Ινστιτούτου Κλασικών Σπουδών του Λονδίνου, κύριος Γκρέγκ Βολφ, δεν ήταν δυνατόν να ταξιδέψει λόγω ανηλυμένων υποχρεώσεων. Δεν έχω κάτι άλλο να πω. Σας χαιρετίζω, σας ευχαριστώ και παρακαλώ την κυρία Κρεμίδη να πάρει το λόγο και να παρουσιάσει, να αναφερθεί σε πιο ειδικά και στην ομιλήτριά μας. Σας ευχαριστώ.
Καλησπέρα και από μένα. Να σας ευχαριστήσω και εγώ όλους πάρα πολύ που ανταποκριθήκατε σε αυτή την πρόσκληση σήμερα, παρόλο το δύσκολο καιρό και τις δύσκολες συνθήκες της πόλης. Εγώ θέλω απλώς να πω 2 λόγια για το πώς ξεκίνησε αυτή η προσπάθεια, αυτή η συνεργασία. Πρόκειται για μια συνεργασία με τους Άγγλους συναδέλφους μας, με το, όπως σας είπε ο κ. Διευθυντής, με την Αγγλική Αρχαιολογική Σχολή στην Αθήνα και το Ινστιτούτο Κλασικών Σπουδών στο Λονδίνο. Είμαστε πάρα πολύ ευτυχείς που έχουμε την ευκαιρία να συνεργαστούμε και να ανταλλάξουμε απόψεις και εμπειρίες. Αυτή η πρωτοβουλία ξεκίνησε, αυτή η σειρά ομιλιών, ετήσιων ομιλιών, ξεκίνησαν πριν από 2 χρόνια με την πρωτοβουλία της συναδέλφου μου στο Ινστιτούτο Ιστορικών Ερευνών, διδάκτορος και αρχαιολόγου Μύρινας Καλαϊτζή. Το 2015 είχαμε την χαρά και την τιμή να έχουμε προσκεκλημένο τον Ρόλαντ Μπέρτ, έναν από τους γνωστότερους αρχαιολόγους, καθηγητής στο Πανεπιστήμιο της Οξφόρδης, ο οποίος μας μίλησε για την σύζευξη του ελληνικού και του ρωμαϊκού στοιχείου στις πόλεις της Ανατολής. Την επόμενη χρονιά και με πρωτοβουλία του κύριου Μπένετ, του Διευθυντή της Αγγλικής Σχολής, προσκαλέσαμε μια πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα ομιλήτρια, την καθηγήτρια στο King's College του Λονδίνου, την θεατρολόγο και μελετήτρια του ελληνικού πολιτισμού, κυρία Edith Hall, η οποία προσέφερε μια πολύ πρωτότυπη και διαφορετική ερμηνεία ενός κλασικού έργου, των ορνήθων του Αριστοφάνη. Επειδή λοιπόν θεωρήσαμε πως αυτή η συνεργασία και αυτές οι αιτήσεις διαλέξεις αξίζει να συνεχιστούν και να θεσμοθετηθούν, φέτος ενισχύσαμε λίγο την ομάδα μας από την πλευρά του Ινστιτούτου και μαζί με την κυρία Καλαϊτζή συνεργαστήκαμε ο κύριος Νίκος Ανδρουτσόπουλος και η ομιλούσα. Ο στόχος αυτής της συνεργασίας, της ελληνοβρετανικής θα την ονόμαζα συνεργασίας, που συνεχίζεται για 3η χρονιά, είναι πολλαπλός. Καταρχήν θέλουμε να δημιουργήσουμε ένα πεδίο διαλόγου ανάμεσα στους εκπροσώπους των συγχρόνων ρευμάτων στη μελέτη της αρχαιογνωσίας και να προσφέρουμε στην ακαδημαϊκή και ευρύτερη κοινότητα της Αθήνας την ευκαιρία να παρακολουθήσει και να συνομιλήσει με μερικούς από τους πιο αξιόλογους ακαδημαϊκούς δασκάλους και στοχαστές που προέρχονται από τα πανεπιστήμια του Ηνωμένου Βασιλείου. Ο δεύτερος στόχος μας είναι να προβάλλουμε τη σημασία της μελέτης της αρχαιότητας, των διάφορων εκφάνσεων του ελληνικού πολιτισμού, αλλά και τις επιδράσεις που άσκησε και δέχτηκε από γειτονικούς πολιτισμούς με τους οποίους ήρθε σε επαφή. Θέλουμε με τις ομιλίες αυτές να παρουσιάσουμε μια σύγχρονη μορφή της αρχαιογνωσίας, που δεν μένει καθυλωμένη στις αρχές του κλασικισμού και στη σχολαστική τυπολογική προσέγγιση των καταλήπων της αρχαιότητας. Επιδιώκουμε να αναδείξουμε μια αρχαιογνωσία που αντιμετωπίζει τα μνημεία του υλικού πολιτισμού, αλλά και τα λογοτεχνικά, ιστορικά, φιλοσοφικά κείμενα και τα έργα τέχνης ως τμήματα ενός ενιαίου κόσμου, τον οποίο επιχειρούμε να ανασυστήσουμε, αλλά και να συνδέσουμε με τη σημερινή μας ζωή, τις σημερινές αναζητήσεις και αγωνίες μας, αλλά και τη σύγχρονη αισθητική μας. Για το λόγο αυτό, φέτος, για πρώτη φορά, επιδιώξαμε να μην απευθυνθούμε αποκλειστικά στην ακαδημαϊκή κοινότητα. Αντιθέτως, προσπαθήσαμε να προσεγγίσουμε και ένα ευρύτερο κοινό, με την ελπίδα να πείσουμε πως το βλέμμα στο παρελθόν αφορά και το μέλλον και πως οι ανθρωπιστικές σπουδές έχουν τη θέση τους στο σύγχρονο κόσμο. Η σημερινή ομιλήτρια, η καθηγήτρια του Πανεπιστήμιου του Sheffield στην έδρα της κατανόησης της φιλοσοφίας για το κοινό, κυρία Angie Hobbs, αυτό ακριβώς επειδή θα επιδιώξει να καταδείξει. Θα ήθελα τέλος να ευχαριστήσω εκ μέρους όλων των διοργανωτών τη Βρετανική Πρεσβεία στην Αθήνα, που υποστήριξε με πολύ ουσιαστικό τρόπο την προσπάθειά μας, αναλαμβάνοντας την υποστήριξη της ταυτόχρονης διερμηνίας στην ελληνική, τον Διευθυντή του Ινστιτούτου μας, που αγκάλιασε αυτή τη συνεργασία και ανέταξε τις φθινοπορεινές διαλέξεις στο πρόγραμμα του Ινστιτούτου, αλλά και όλους όσους βοήθησαν στην πραγματοποίηση της σημερινής εκδήλωσης. Ιδιαίτερα πρέπει να ευχαριστήσουμε την κυρία Σοφία Σαρογλίδου, αλλά και όλη τη γραμματεία του Ινστιτούτου για τη βοήθεια που μας παρήχαν. Τέλος, ιδιαίτερα μνήμα πρέπει να γίνει στην Elite Language Services και στον κύριο Χάριο Γκίνο, που όχι μόνο ανέλαβαν τη διερμηνία στην ελληνική και αντίστροφα, αλλά κυρίως μας έφεραν σε επαφή με τις διερμηνείς στην ελληνική νοηματική, οι οποίες προσφέρουν τις υπηρεσίες τους αφιλοκερδώς. Ευχαριστούμε θερμά τις κυρίες Ουρανία Ιορδανίδου και Ξένια Νικολακοπούλου και τις συνεργάτηδές τους για την προσφορά τους. Είναι ίσως η πρώτη φορά που το Εθνικό Ίδρυμα Ερευνών είναι σε θέση να προσφέρει μια διάλεξη υψηλού επίπεδου σε ακροατές με προβλήματα ακοής. Είναι βαθιά μας πεποίθηση πως το μήνυμα των ανθρωπιστικών σπουδών πρέπει να φτάσει σε όσο το δυνατόν περισσότερους αποδέκτες. Σας ευχαριστώ πολύ και θα δώσω τον λόγο στον Διευθυντή της Αγγλικής Σχολής, ο οποίος θα παρουσιάσει την ομιλήτρια.
Αξιότιμη κυρία Πρέσβη, κύριε Διευθυντά, κύριοι συνάδελφοι, κυρίες και κύριοι, θα ήθελα και εγώ, ως Διευθυντής της Βρετανικής Σχολής Αθηνών, να σας καλωσορίσω όλους εδώ στον Εθνικό Ίδρυμα Ερευνών και να σας μεταβιβάσω τους χαιρετισμούς του καθηγητή Greg Wolf, Διευθυντή του Ινστιτούτου Κλασικών Σπουδών στο Λονδίνο, του τρίτου χορηγού της σημερινής φθινοπορεινής διάλεξης. Θα ήθελα να ευχαριστήσω θερμός και την Βρετανική Πρεσβεία για την υποστήριξή της που μας επιτρέπει να έχουμε απόψε ταυτόχρονη μετάφραση. Μου δίνει ιδιαίτερα χαρά να σας παρουσιάσω τώρα την ομιλήτρια. Η Angie Hobbs είναι μία από τις πιο γνωστές και πιο διακεκριμένες προσωπικότητες στο ακαδημαϊκό χώρο στη Μεγάλη Βρετανία. Από το 2012 είναι καθηγήτρια στο Πανεπιστήμιο του Sheffield, το δικό μου πανεπιστήμιο, στο τμήμα φιλοσοφίας, στην έδρα της κατανόησης της φιλοσοφίας από το κοινό. Από όσο ξέρουμε, τη μοναδική έδρα σε αυτό το συγκεκριμένο θέμα στον κόσμο. Τυχιόκος κλασικών σπουδών του Πανεπιστήμιου του Cambridge, εκπώνησε την διδακτορική της διατριβή εκεί με τον καθηγητή Miles Berniat στο θέμα Homeric Role Models and Platonic Psychology. Πριν από τις τωρινή της έδρας στο Sheffield είχε αναλάβει θέσεις και στα πανεπιστήμια του Cambridge ως ερευνητική εταίρος στο Christ College και του Warwick. Τα ερευνητικά της ενδιαφέροντα επικεντρώνονται στην αρχαία φιλοσοφία και φιλολογία, την ηθική και την πολιτική θεωρία, τομείς στους οποίους έχει παραγάγει πλούσιο συγγραφικό έργο συμπεριλαμβανομένου του βιβλίου της Plato and the Hero, των πανεπιστημιακών εκδόσεων του Cambridge. Αυτή τη στιγμή ασχολείται με μια νέα μετάφραση και έκδοση του συμποσίου του Πλάτωνα. Ως μία από τις οξυδερκείς ερμηνεύτριες του κόσμου της αρχαιότητας, η Angie κατανοεί την σχετικότητα αυτού του κόσμου με την σύγχρονη μας εποχή. Ως αποτέλεσμα, είναι η τακτική συνεργάτης ραδιοφωνικών και τηλεοπτικών εκπομπών και το έργο της παρουσιάζεται επίσης στα ηλεκτρονικά μέσα. Έχει δώσει διαλέξεις στο Παγκόσμιο Οικονομικό Φόρουμ του Ντάβος, στο Βρετανικό Κοινοβούλιο, στο Κοινοβούλιο της Σκωτίας, στο Αβαΐο του Westminster και έχει προσκληθεί σε δημοφιλείς ραδιοφωνικές εκπομπές του BBC, Desert Island Discs, Private Passions και Test Match Special. Για όσους δεν είναι οπαδοί αυτών των εκπομπών, στις δύο πρώτες επιλέγει ο προσκεκλημένος κομμάτια μουσικής τα οποία του αρέσουν. Η τρίτη εκπομπή έχει σχέση με το άθλημα του κρίκετ και θα χρειαστεί μια ολόκληρη διάλεξη να την περιγράψω. Ευτυχώς δεν θα έχεις. Πιο σοβαρά, η Angie είναι εταίρος της Βασιλικής Ακαδημίας Τεχνών του Λονδίνου, επίτιμη προστάτηδα του Philosophy Foundation και προστάτηδα του προγράμματος «Η Φιλοσοφία στην Εκπαίδευση». Με μεγάλη χαρά προσκαλώ τώρα στο βήμα την καθηγήτρια Angie Hobbs για να δώσει την διάλεξη της με θέμα Democracy, Demagoguery and Plato. Angie.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ για την πρόσκληση. Okay. Thank you so much. So, democracy, demagoguery, and Plato. Here we have Plato, looking fetching in cerise, in Raphael's School of Athens, his pupil Aristotle, looking winsome in blue. I'm not sure they really wandered around Athens in colour, but it's a fabulous picture. You can still see it in the Vatican. Now, what is democracy? In the last couple of years, a lot of words have been tossed around which cry out for philosophical analysis. Sovereignty, nationalism, patriotism, populism, identity, representation, will, control. I am going to concentrate today on one of the most contested terms of all, democracy. It has been very noticeable that in a number of recent elections around the world, and perhaps particularly in the British referendum and the American and the US election in 2016, that supporters of the two campaigns in the referendum and the two main parties in the US election, they all claimed that it was their side that was truly supporting democracy. And they claimed this both during the campaigns and after the result. They're still claiming it. So first, I shall outline some of the philosophical challenges that arise when considering this term. And then I shall suggest ways in which Plato can help us think through these challenges. Now, why turn to Plato? This may initially seem surprising. After all, Plato only had experience of the direct democracy of 5th and 4th century Athens. He had no experience of the liberal representational democracies that emerged in Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries in particular. And while he acknowledged democracy's charms, tolerant, varied, free-spirited, fun, he was also highly critical of Athenian democracy. Witness his very penetrating critique of it in Republic Book 8, which we will be returning to later. Nevertheless, in the second half of this talk, we will see just why I believe Plato can still illuminate current problems and also, I think, provide some help with possible solutions. So in the first half of this talk, we're going to be looking at some current philosophical challenges that liberal representational democracy gives us. Then in the second half, I'm going to be bringing in Plato, and we're going to see how he can help us. So some definitions. I don't need, the Greek speakers amongst you, you won't need these definitions. This is for those of you for whom Greek is not your first language. So democracy, of course, rule by the demos, rule by the people. Demagoguery, leading of the people by one or more popular leaders. It often implies manipulation of the people, a cynical manipulation of the people, but it literally just means leading of the people. So in the first, in democracy, the people are meant to be in control. In the second, demagoguery, the people are being led. However, although these words, of course, have Greek roots, demos, kratia, agoga in ancient Greek, as I have said, I shall not initially be considering the direct democracy of ancient Athens so much as the type of representational liberal democracy that arose in the 17th and 18th centuries and is based on the theories of individual civic and human rights put forward by philosophers such as Locke, Kant, Thomas Paine, and others. So it's very important right at the outset to emphasize that the intellectual basis for democracy lies not so much in an appeal to what the majority believe or want, as in these theories of civic and human rights. That is a really important distinction to make. If people are asked to give an intellectual support, a philosophical support for democracy, it's not in this is what the majority of people want. We don't even know if that's true. We've not been asked. The intellectual basis is in these theories of civic rights in the 17th century and human rights in the 18th century. As a citizen and as a human, you have a voice and you deserve to have that voice heard. Now, this is perhaps fortunate, as the fact that the majority of people believe something to be true does not of itself make it true, or the earth would have been flat for all the hundreds of years that most people believed it to be flat. And the fact that the majority of people believe something to be good does not of itself make it good, or slavery would have been good for all the hundreds of years that most people thought it was either good or at least part of the natural order of things. But the fact that a democratic system is based on civic and human rights means we can support the basic system of democracy while still allowing that sometimes democracies make terrible decisions. Hitler, of course, came to power through manipulating democratic referenda, which is why referenda have been illegal in Germany ever since. Just saying. Right, so now, a bit of controversy here. An interesting episode in Athens's past. The Mitylenian debate, which I'm sure you remember. So another very famous example of a direct democratic decision that the democracy swiftly came to regret is dramatized by Thucydides in Book 3 of his History of the Peloponnesian War. In 427 BC, the polis of Mitylene on Lesbos rebelled against what was in effect Athenian rule, what was in effect an Athenian empire by this time. And the angry Athenian demos, fired on by the demagogue Cleon, of whom we will hear more later, the Athenian demos voted to put all the male inhabitants of Mitylene to death and to enslave all the women and children. They sent out a trireme to relay these instructions to the Athenian navy and army, which was in the vicinity of Mitylene. So the Athenian commander Paches, he had troops both on land in Lesbos and in boats on the sea. He was surrounding the polis of Mitylene. He was basically besieging Mitylene. So troops were there ready to carry out these orders of putting all the male citizens to death and enslaving the women and children. Happily, the very next day, and under the influence of Diodotus, there was another debate, and Thucydides dramatizes the speeches which he imagines that Cleon gave, the angry, violent Cleon gave on the one hand, and the more measured, reasonable, humane Diodotus on the other hand. And the Athenian demos repented of this decision, and they sent out another trireme. Extra men on board. They were given lots of wine and lots of extra food, and they were told that if they rowed through the night and did not stop, could they please row extra fast and not stop for nightfall and catch up the first boat to stop this order being put into effect. Now, the first boat actually did arrive at Lesbos first, but the second boat arrived immediately afterwards. So it was very dramatic, according to Thucydides. Paches was reading out the death sentence to all male inhabitants of Mitylene, and the second boat arrives and stops the order, and Mitylene is saved. Mostly saved. They did actually put over 1,000 Mitylene men to death, whom they regarded as ringleaders, but mostly saved. Now, the point is that a bad democratic decision, such as the Athenians initially came to with Mitylene, or voting to put Socrates to death in 399 BC, you might think it was another. A bad democratic decision, we might all think of other bad democratic decisions in more recent times, perhaps, does not mean that the democratic system itself is wrong and to be discarded. Precisely because we have seen that the basis for democracy is civic and human rights. So you can keep the system while acknowledging that sometimes the decisions are terrible. But does mean that we have to think very hard about how to create and maintain a healthy, thoughtful, accurately informed democracy. And this may include, indeed, debate about the relative merits and strengths of direct democracy on the one hand and representational democracy on the other. Now, so some philosophical questions. First, who are the people? Back to our analysis of democracy. Who are the people? A, everyone in the state or group. Everybody. B, everybody who can vote. C, everybody who did actually vote. D, those who voted on the winning side. When you hear the phrase the people, and indeed the will of the people, you will find all these meanings in play, but quite often D. But when you hear the phrase the people have spoken, ask yourself, who are the people? A, B, C, or D? It varies, quite often D. But casual equivalences between the people as a whole and all or some of the electorate are very dangerous, because those casual equivalences imply that those who cannot vote, or those who can vote but did not, or those who voted on the losing side, are not part of the people. That is the implication. Perhaps not even properly persons at all. And this is the first of two reasons why the phrase, the will of the people, is such a misleading and often dangerous phrase. And we will be looking at the second reason later. But whenever you hear the phrase, the will of the people, your antennae should be coming up. It is a dangerous phrase. What does it really mean? Who are the majority? Now, working out what the majority means is not always straightforward either. Even if you're just talking about the majority of the electorate, not the majority of the people, but the majority of the electorate. Particularly if there are more than two options to choose between. So, for instance, if you have 3 or 4 or 5 parties to vote for, the winning party might, for instance, have 33, 34% of the vote, and so they have more votes than any other single party, but they clearly have less than 50% of the electorate. And even if you have 2 main parties, there could be a difference, say, between the popular vote and the electoral college vote, as there was in the US, which again muddies the water, makes things complicated. But let us say that on a particular day there is a clear majority who vote for one option. On a different day, however, the next year or month, or theoretically even the very next day, there could be a different majority vote for two reasons. Firstly, the constituency of the electorate could change. Teenagers come of age to vote. My daughter was very annoyed she was not quite of age to vote in the referendum. She now is of age, she's ready. Others might die or become too incapacitated to vote. So the constituency of the electorate itself can change. The second reason is that individual voters could change their minds. And there's clearly even more likelihood of one or both of those options happening if the outcome of the vote is supposed to endure for decades or even forever. So the longer the length of time for which you are voting, clearly the more likelihood there is that the constituency of the electorate could change or individual voters could change their mind. However, clearly you can't have constant voting. I mean, administratively, it would be impossible. You can't have votes, every month or two. You can't have consequent changes of government and policy every 2 minutes. It wouldn't work. Extreme instability makes administration impossible. It would put off investors, lead to a decline in economic growth. It's just hopeless. So how do you balance what the majority of the electorate want at any given moment with stability? So in the case of general elections, we usually make a compromise. In Greece, I think it's every 4 years, is that right? Have I got that right? Good. 5 years in the UK, possibly. Not always. In the interest of stability. And democracies themselves can, in principle, make this choice. I don't think we've been asked, but in principle, a democracy can decide only to have an election every 4 or 5 years to balance stability on the one hand with knowing what the majority of people want on the other hand. However, we still need to be clear-sighted here. We need to recognize that in modern liberal representational democracies, an elected government, a perfectly properly, legally elected government, may often not be supported by the majority of the electorate, let alone the majority of the people as a whole, for all or indeed most of its duration. It was supported by the majority of the electorate on the day of the vote, but for much of its duration, maybe the majority of its duration, it may not be supported by the majority of the electorate. That's how it is. Now, this does not alter the validity of the outcome of the original vote on a particular day, or it doesn't alter the moral validity of it, unless perhaps it can be shown that the outcome of the vote was the direct result of the telling of lies and the misrepresentation of facts, which is difficult to prove. So you can't just say, oh, there were lies involved in that election campaign. Facts were misrepresented in that election campaign. To show that there was a moral problem here, you would have to be able to, there's obviously a moral problem with lying. To show that there is moral doubt about the outcome of the election, you would have to prove that the outcome of the election was the direct result of those lies, and that is very difficult to prove. However, it does make us think really hard about what rule by the electorate really means. If democracy means rule by the people, and if that is at least partly embodied in voting, then it makes us think hard if we recognize that for maybe the majority of a parliament, the majority of the electorate do not support that parliament. However, does democracy, rule by the people, does rule really amount to no more than one ballot on one particular day? Is it solely embodied in voting? Or is the ballot the most important part of an ongoing conversation in which the electorate, both winners and losers, can take part, and indeed in which even those not allowed to vote can take part, such as those not yet of electoral age? My daughter was writing to her member of parliament way before she was 18 with letters of issues of concern. He never replied. He's now out of power, as it so happens, lost in the last election. Now, the intellectual foundations of liberal democracy in civic and human rights, which we examined at the beginning, suggest that it is this second option, the option, namely, that the ballot on a particular day is the most important part of democracy, but still only a part, that democracy as an ongoing conversation in which all people can take part, losers as well as winners. Because if the basis for democracy is your civic and human rights, then you have a right to have your individual voice heard. Right, the wills of persons, not the will of the people. But even if we just restrict the conversation to the current electorate, so not just the people as a whole, but the current electorate, it is crucial to emphasize that each individual ruler, i.e. each individual voter in the democracy, acts on his or her individual choice or will. This is the second reason why the phrase, the will of the people, is so dangerously deceptive. Because it suggests that the people are not a diverse collection of individual and diverse wills, but a homogeneous mass with a single homogeneous will. Now, it's important to emphasize that this does not mean that collective action for the common good is impossible. So saying that we all have an individual voice and an individual will does not mean that we cannot work together for the common good. Individuals can separately decide to plan and act together for a common cause. So a commitment to the principle of separate wills, of separate persons thinking for themselves, which is at the basis of all human rights, that does not in itself commit one to any specific political agenda. You can take it in a right-wing or a left-wing direction. But the point is, it's the wills of persons, not the will of the people. We're not a blob. So collective action is perfectly compatible with human rights, but the notion of a homogeneous will is not compatible with human rights. Because the notion of a homogeneous will not only disrespects human and civic rights, it also allows an unscrupulous demagogue to claim that only he or she can truly understand, channel, and represent the single will of the single people. And as we know from history, demagogues often have said, actually, we don't need Parliament. We don't need Congress. We don't need an independent judiciary or a free press. I am the people. Speak through me. I am channeling your will. We get rid of all the rest of liberal democracy. It gets in the way of implementing the will of the people, which is done solely through me. We know that from history. Now, it's at this point that I think Plato is of huge assistance. Because Plato makes a very interesting, and I admit, very controversial claim in, for example, the Gorgias 466, and I'll read a couple of quotes in a minute. In his dialogue, the Gorgias in 466 following, and in the Republic, many places in the Republic, particularly in 577. Plato claims that true rule can only take place if the ruler or rulers act from accurately informed, deliberative, rational choice, and not just on a momentary whim. And in these passages, as we'll see in a moment, Plato makes a clear differentiation between two phrases in ancient Greek. One is boulomai plus the infinitive. I wish, I want, but in the sense of a rationally informed, reflective wish. And moi doke plus the infinitive. It seems a good idea to me. I feel like doing. I may not have thought about this. I may not know what I'm doing. It's what I want to do. And let me just read, I'm afraid in English, but I will read slowly so the interpreters can follow. A short passage from Plato's Gorgias. In this section of the dialogue, the character of Socrates is debating with the character of Polus about who has the most power in the city. And Polus thinks orators and tyrants have the most power because both can do what they want and get other people to do what they want. And Socrates says, to Polus's surprise, to my thinking, the orators have the smallest power of all who are in the city. Polus: what? Are they not like the tyrants, the despots, in putting to death anyone they please and depriving anyone of his property and expelling him from their cities, as they may think fit. Socrates, I think you are asking me two things at once. How? Were you not this moment saying something like this? Is it not the case that the orators put to death anyone they wish? And the verb for wish there is from boulemai. Like the despots, and deprive people of property and expel them from their cities as they may think fit. And that verb is the moi doke, to feel like doing something. Polus has used those two phrases interchangeably, boulemai and moi doke. Socrates is separating them. Yes, says Polus. Then I tell you, says Socrates, there are two questions here, and I will give you answers to them both. For I say, Polus, that the orators and the despots have the least power in their cities, since they do nothing that they want to do, though they do whatever they feel like. Is that not a great power to have? No, because you said that great power is a good to him who has it. Yes. Then do you regard it as a good when a man does what he feels like without having intelligence, nous? Is that what you call having a great power? And the argument continues, and Socrates persuades Polus that orators and tyrants do whatever they feel like through words or through military force, but they don't do what they truly want because they don't know what that is, because they do not understand where their true good lies. And there is a similar argument in the Republic 577 passage that we looked at. So, says Plato, those who act on unreflective, ill-informed whims are at risk of being manipulated by opportunistic demagogues. And in Republic, a very famous passage in Republic 562 to 569, Plato provides an incisive and utterly chilling analysis of this process. And of course, Plato had had personal experience of demagogues in Athens, such as Cleon. I mean, Cleon dies soon after Plato's born, but he hears all about the stories. Cleon, you remember, was the thug who initially persuaded the Athenian democracy to put all the male citizens of Mitylene to death. It's often claimed he's one of the first demagogues, or at least one of the first demagogues that we know about in history. Aristotle says that Cleon was the first to shout in meetings, to hurl abuse at his opponents. And apparently he used to hitch up his clothes in a very provocative and rude manner, deliberately to offend the more refined members of his audience. He set out to shock and offend. That was his technique. So in this famous passage in the Republic, Plato says the demagogue first gains power through democratic mechanisms, claiming to be a champion of the people. I can give you the exact references in the questions. I won't stop and give you every reference, but I can. And makes wild promises, promises the earth. In particular, the demagogue promises his supporters intoxicating quantities of the neat spirit, the neat wine of freedom. Eleutheria in the Greek. Freedom! Anybody who opposes the demagogue is labeled an enemy of the people and exiled, or they have their property confiscated. They may even be killed. Now, such tactics not unnaturally create genuine enemies. You're going to clearly create an enemy of somebody you've exiled or taken away his property, or if you've killed him, you're going to make an enemy of his family. So the demagogue gets a lot of enemies very quickly, and he quickly acquires a large private bodyguard because he doesn't trust anybody else to look after him. And eventually he acquires a private army. He then starts to stir up external conflicts. Why? To keep the people in need of a strong leader, Plato says. If there's trouble abroad, they're going to want a strong authority figure at home. And interestingly, Plato claims that it's also in the demagogue's interests to keep his supporters poor as well as fearful. Now, you might think that's odd. The demagogue has promised his supporters everything. Why keep them poor deliberately? Well, Plato thinks he's got into power by appealing to the poor and the angry and the dispossessed. If they become rich and possessed and not angry, they're not going to need the demagogue anymore. This is Plato's psychological analysis. So he keeps his supporters poor as well as fearful. And when his former supporters start to rebel, saying, "This is not why we voted you in," then he finally attacks them too. And the full-blooded tyrant is born. In Plato's very graphic language, the man tastes raw meat and the man becomes a wolf. He does not mince his words. And thus, says Plato, this is how democracy via a demagogue can turn into slavery. Plato is not alone. The Greek historian Polybius, writing he was born in 200 BC, dies at the end of that century. Polybius thinks that democracies are inevitably destroyed by demagogues. He thinks that every democracy decays into what he calls, quote, a government of violence and the strong hand. And that this leads, he says, to, quote, turbulent assemblies, massacres, banishments. And much later, in the 17th century in Britain, the philosopher Thomas Hobbes said that a democracy is no more than an aristocracy of orators. So various thinkers throughout history have been very alert to the fragility of democracy and how it can be subverted from the freest of all political constitutions to a tyranny, to slavery, via a demagogue who initially proclaims himself or herself to be a champion of the people. Plato, of course, was writing, and indeed Polybius, they were writing about direct democracies. Thomas Hobbes is writing more about emergent representational democracies. Well, a kind of mix. But they're all concerned that democracy is very fragile. Now, Plato was not a democrat. In his list of constitutions, democracy is fourth. He's not a big fan. He had seen it put Socrates, his beloved Socrates, to death. But Plato does think that democracy is very much better than tyranny. And he does give us a very acute analysis of how it can disintegrate. Again, Thomas Hobbes was no democrat, but provides a very interesting analysis of its vulnerabilities. Now, for those of us, and I would count myself among them, who care about democracy, particularly liberal representational democracy based on civic and human rights, and who want to try to strengthen it and protect it, what can we do at a very interesting point in our global history? Plato's demagogues peddle fantasy and have utter contempt for the facts. Very interesting feature of Plato's demagogues in Republic. They have absolutely no interest in facts. They sell their supporters utter fantasies. What can we do to help ourselves resist demagogues and to protect democracy from sliding into tyranny? You will all have your own thoughts and suggestions, and I look forward to your questions in a moment. Here are some of my suggestions to start the conversation. Freedom of expression, including a free press. Now, you might think, oh, well, Plato was no supporter of freedom of expression. And it's true that in his Republic, the character of Socrates heavily censors artists. I would argue that Plato, the off-stage author, is far more open and aphoretic and questioning and free than the authoritarian views put into the mouth of the character of Socrates, especially in the Republic. One piece of evidence for this view. The dialogue that we call the Republic, Politeia, would be banned in the ideally just state that it purports to describe. It does not meet the censorship criteria. Plato has written a work which we call the Republic, which would be banned in the ideally just state it describes. I do not think that Plato, the supreme artist and ironist, as well as a supreme philosopher, can have been unaware of that irony. As part of freedom of expression, we need access to accurate information. The internet clearly has both great strengths and weaknesses in this respect, which we are only just beginning to understand and try to grapple with. Hence all the debates recently with Google and Facebook and so on. And of course, good education, which interestingly Plato spends far more time discussing in the Republic than he does law. The Republic is one of perhaps two of the most powerful and influential political treatises ever written, along with maybe Marx's Manifesto or perhaps Das Kapital. And yet the Republic, this great work of political theory, barely mentions law. It is all about education. And I would suggest that education in the humanities, and perhaps especially philosophy, you will allow me that, is crucial in this respect. Because such subjects as classics, philosophy, ancient philosophy, help us consider what a flourishing individual and communal life might look like, a life of eudaimonia. The humanities, classics, philosophy, history, also provide the intellectual tools required to try to work towards such individual and communal flourishing. What tools? The construction and analysis of both deductive and inductive arguments. An ability to discuss together and listen to the views of others, sadly lacking in a lot of our recent political debates, at least in Britain, but one which we are now going to demonstrate as we all listen to each other now, and I'm going to listen to your views in the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angie. To make things simpler for our speaker, I'm going to speak in English, but I'm not going to say very much at all, because now is an opportunity for you to pose questions to our speaker. She will wear headphones so that she can hear questions either in Greek, translated into English, or of course directly in English. So I open the forum to questions for Angie.
Thank you so much for that. I definitely agree with your emphasis on the freedom of speech. At the end, I definitely agree with what you said about the importance of classics. At the end, I wanted to ask you a bit about referenda. So you might say that when people have referenda, they're not really looking for a factual decision about whether the earth is flat or whether, Tanzania has a bigger population than France. What they're looking to do is really make a decision. And so making a decision about something that's not factual but normative. In other words, it's an issue facing the community. So, take Brexit. Does Britain want to leave the EU? Okay, you might think there's a right and wrong answer to that, but it's clear that it's a different kind of question than a question of mathematics, for example. So then the majority rule, the majority voting, what it effectively does is it gives everybody an equal say in that decision, in a way that aggregates all the preferences, in a way that everybody's will is added up in that particular way. And so the will of all the people in the United Kingdom goes towards that one decision. And so you not only get what you might call information about a right or wrong answer, you get information about what people want. And I think that has an advantage over the way that Plato wants us to do things, which is effectively to say, look, you can just get a wise person, get a single individual wise guy, and educate him really well, and he'll just know what's good. He'll just know what's good for the UK, he'll know what's good for Greece. And while I think that's an interesting idea, and it's a high ideal, I think it's ultimately a chimerical one.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Can people hear me? Good. There were several questions embedded in that very interesting collective question. So, though I'm a huge fan of Plato, though I love Plato, I certainly don't agree with a lot of the political views put into the mouth of Socrates in the Republic. I don't want the world run by philosopher rulers. I think that would be a disaster, tempting though it is. I do think there is a very interesting debate to be had about the role of experts and expertise in our society and how that expertise should be challenged and critiqued and used and so on. I do think there is a very interesting debate about what do we mean by representational democracy? Do we want our rulers to represent what we wish for? Do we want our rulers to represent our needs, which might be more objective? Do we want our rulers to represent us in various other ways, such as race or religion or class or sexual orientation or educational attainment or whatever? So there is a huge debate which we need to have, which we have not yet had, about what we mean by representational democracy and what we want represented. Now, in terms of referenda, I agree that they have a place. I certainly think they have a place as advisory referenda. They can be very useful in giving advice. I follow Germany in having grave doubts about referenda in two other respects. I mean, they can be very seductive. I like to give my opinion as much as anybody else. The first problem is that if you're voting in a government, you're ticking a box and your vote will, the majority votes will get to form the next government. You're not voting in a law. And laws then take, in the British system, a considerable time. They go back and forth between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and civil servants have a say and lawyers have a say, and there is at least the potential for a reflective and informed discussion before a law happens. In a referendum, there may or may not be the opportunity for a reflective and informed discussion. It depends on the quality of the campaigns and the debates beforehand. So that's one problem with referenda, that it can bring in laws without a period to gather accurate information and reflection. The other potential problem with referenda is one we looked at in the talk tonight, is that they tend to make decisions for much longer periods of time. So whereas with a government, even if the majority of the people don't like that government 2 days after it was voted in, within 4 or 5 years they can get rid of it, maybe less. Whereas with referenda, you may have a position where within a period of time, because people have changed their minds or because some people have died and others have come of age to vote, that the majority of the people do or don't want what the referendum decided, and they have no say in the matter. So you could have a position where for 40, 50, 60 years, something has been voted in which the majority of the younger population now don't want. So in that respect, the referendum, though it is an instrument of direct democracy, and though initially it looks very appealing, you can end up being very tyrannical for many, many years for younger voters who did not get a vote at the time, but then have a decision made for them for maybe for decades. So my own view on referenda is that though they are initially seductive and appealing, and they do have a place, I think they have a good advisory position. In terms of making laws for those two reasons, I think they can be problematic, and I tend to share Germany's concerns over them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your inspiring talk. I agree with you that the notion of the will of the people is a slippery one, semantically or theoretically, and politically dangerous. But interestingly enough, in your example of the Thucydides, there is an instance of something one might be justified in calling the will of the people. Because what do we have? We have a decision to destroy Mitylene one day, let's say yesterday. And then today, we have another ecclesia of the demos. Why should we have another assembly the next day? I mean, there is a motivation for the new ecclesia of demos. And this motivation, Thucydides as a narratio, tells us it was pity. I mean, they found that this punishment was cruel. That's his words. But then we have the formal, this is what Thucydides tells us as a narrator. But then we have the formal debates. No mention to pity in the formal debates. Cleon says, don't afraid to be cruel. He does not, of course, he doesn't refer to pity. Diodotus, the winning argument, speaks about good politics. I mean, it's not good politics, but the coalition to do this. It's bad international relations. It's not good for you. It's not good for your interests. I mean, there is no mention of the notion of pity or humanitarian. There is no reference to humanitarian reasons. So what does that mean? It means that we all know, they all knew, that the real motivation for the new decision was humanitarian. Diogenes knows this very well. And he says, on top of that, it's also bad policy. But all the same, he leaves unmentioned something that could be an argument. Today, for us, it could be an argument. So, how would we characterize this repentance, this sentiment of the Athenian people, the fact that they found cruel the punishment? I would say this unnamed factor that did not pass in the formal argumentation is something that one could name the will of the people.
Okay, so you raise a very interesting point about Diodotus's arguments. It does seem clear to me, reading Thucydides, that Thucydides knew that people were feeling very ashamed of what they'd done, and they were looking for a get-out clause. Now, what Diodotus does very cleverly is he allows those who had voted for Cleon the day before, who liked to think they were tough, pragmatic, hard-headed, ruthless men of affairs, not soppy pity people, he gives them a way to vote against Cleon very, very cleverly by using this very practical, pragmatic argument, saying it's not in your interest to do this. And he wins the day. So he knows that his own supporters, of course, are going to be motivated by pity, but he doesn't need to win over his own supporters. He needs to win over the other side and say, look, you can be really tough men of action and you can still vote for me. So it's very, very clever politics, and Thucydides knows that. Now, I would still say, I mean, that what you have at the end is a lot of separate wills and separate decisions adding up to a new majority decision. Because Thucydides does not say this was groupthink. He says it was a very close vote. The second vote was really close. There was debate. People were agonizing. They were thinking really hard. So I still say that this new second majority decision was the result of separate individuals listening, debating, hearing the arguments, thinking for themselves. So I'm still unhappy about calling that majority decision the will of the people. But I take your point. I mean, for me, Thucydides is the greatest historian who ever lived and wrote. He is just cleverer than everybody else and so psychologically acute. A brilliant psychologist and a brilliant strategist. And if only more of our politicians read these speeches, they might have some more ways of winning over those who disagreed with them. But thank you.
Πολύ ενδιαφέρουσα η σημερινή ομιλία της κυρίας Angie Hobbs. Θα ήθελα να κάνω μια τοποθέτηση σε σχέση με τη δημοκρατία. Φυσικά και συμφωνούμε όσον αφορά τη σημασία της δημοκρατίας, αλλά η δημοκρατία έχει κάποια όρια. Στη δημοκρατία είναι πολύ σημαντικό το παν μέτρον άριστον. Ότι δηλαδή δεν μπορούμε φυσικά να αυθαιρετούμε. Επομένως, η δημοκρατία, ναι, είναι σημαντική, αλλά και ο καθένας έχει τα δικαιώματά του. Ωστόσο όμως, δεν θα πρέπει να παραβιάζουμε κάποιες σημαντικές αρχές της δημοκρατίας. Για παράδειγμα, θα μπορούσε να υπάρξει ελευθερία, να θεσπιστεί ελευθερία όσον αφορά τη χρήση ναρκωτικών. Όχι. Γι' αυτό λοιπόν και λέω ότι η δημοκρατία έχει κάποια όρια. Ναι, η βούληση θα πρέπει να είναι ελεύθερη και αυτό προσηδιάζει στο δημοκρατικό σύστημα. Οι εκλογές, εδώ στην Ελλάδα, βεβαίως ναι, διενεργούνται κάθε 4 χρόνια. Αλλά στην πραγματικότητα δεν διενεργούνται ποτέ κάθε 4 χρόνια. Συνήθως οι εκλογές επαναλαμβάνονται κάθε 2 χρόνια, κάθε 2,5 χρόνια, κάθε 3 χρόνια. Η τετραετία είναι πια πάρα πολύ σπάνια. Και θέλω να μου πείτε εσείς, θυμόσαστε πραγματικά μια κυβέρνηση να έχει τετραετή θητεία? Και σε κάθε κυβέρνηση ο λαός δεν είναι ποτέ ευχαριστημένος, ο λαός θέλει να ανατρέψει την κυβέρνηση και γι' αυτό λοιπόν και διενεργούνται προώρες εκλογές. Ο Πρωθυπουργός και κάθε αρχηγός των κομμάτων ακούνε πραγματικά τον λαό αφού γκράζονται όλη αυτή την βούληση του λαού. Καταγράφουν αυτό που πραγματικά θέλουν όσον αφορά την εκπαίδευση, όσον αφορά την τριτοβάθμια εκπαίδευση, όσον αφορά την υγεία, όσον αφορά την χρήση ναρκωτικών, όσον αφορά οικονομικά θέματα. Και βεβαίως η λίστα συνεχίζεται. Θεωρώ ότι η κυβέρνηση αδιαφορεί όσον αφορά το τι θέλει ο λαός. Η κυβέρνηση μπορεί να θεωρεί σωστό ή λάθος το αίτημα του λαού, ωστόσο όμως μετά, μέσα στην Βουλή, στην Ολομέλεια της Βουλής, παίρνονται κάποιες αποφάσεις. Ο λαός μπορεί να διαφωνεί με αυτές τις αποφάσεις, να θεωρεί ότι οι αποφάσεις αυτές είναι λάθος. Η κυβέρνηση όμως μπορεί να θεωρεί ότι αυτές οι αποφάσεις είναι σωστές. Σε αυτή την περίπτωση, ποιος έχει δίκαιο και ποιος άδικο? Ένα λεπτό ακόμα θα ήθελα να συνεχίσω, παρακαλώ. Φυσικά, όλοι προσπαθούμε για το καλύτερο μέλλον. Η ιστορία που μας είπατε σχετικά με το νησί της Μυτιλήνης και η απόφαση αυτή, η πρώτη απόφαση, ήταν φυσικά λάθος. Ωστόσο, όμως, παίρνονται κάποιες αποφάσεις για το καλό της Ελλάδας και για το μέλλον, για ένα καλό μέλλον. Θα πρέπει όμως σε όλες τις αποφάσεις να υπάρχει λογική, αλλά δυστυχώς οι αποφάσεις δεν συνοδεύονται από τη λογική, αλλά από την οτροπία του συμφέροντος. Και στην πραγματικότητα υπάρχουν δύο δρόμοι. Ο δρόμος ο δύσκολος και ο δρόμος ο εύκολος. Δυστυχώς, οι περισσότεροι επιλέγουν το δεύτερο δρόμο, ψηφίζουν με γνώμονα το συμφέρον τους. Γι' αυτό, λοιπόν, επανέρχομαι στην αρχική μου τοποθέτηση ότι στη δημοκρατία θα πρέπει να τηρούνται κάποια όρια.
Well, thank you very, very much. You raise a number of interesting points there. I think you have given proof of Winston Churchill's famous comment that democracy is the least bad system of government that humanity has yet invented. Not that it's a great form of government, just the least awful form of government. I would still say that a liberal representational democracy is the closest system we have devised so far for enshrining civic and human rights, certainly in theory. Does that happen in practice? That depends on the quality of those elected, and that partly depends on the quality of the debate and that goes into voting. So we can have healthy and unhealthy representational democracies. They can function better or worse. And I tried to suggest at the end how very important education, debate, freedom of the press are for improving the health of our civic democracies, which I'm sure we can all in this room agree are not currently working at optimum level. I can't speak, I don't know enough about the history of Greek elections. We have had some governments in Britain that have lasted the full 5 years. That has sometimes not been a great thing. But yeah, democracy is messy, it's chaotic. Not everybody gets what they want. Nobody gets everything they want. It has many, many flaws. But I think what's important about Plato and the other analysts of democracy that we've looked at tonight is that for all its flaws, things could be much worse. It can be destroyed, and sometimes democracies can destroy themselves. They can vote themselves out of existence. I better be careful here. Are there any Turkish people in the audience tonight? Because in recent Turkish election has been problematic for the continuation of democracy in Turkey, but we may have a debate about that over wine. You may disagree there, but it is possible anyway for democracies to vote themselves out of existence. It's possible for democracies to do great harm for themselves. So we need to think about how to have a healthy, adult, functioning, reflective, thoughtful, accurately informed democracy which can protect itself against some of the harms that you mentioned. One final point, you said, I don't think the government is listening to us. I can't speak for Greek politics, but it's very important to remember that the sovereign bodies in liberal democracies are parliaments. Parliament is sovereign, government is meant to be the executive of parliament. And so quite often we do get tensions between parliaments and governments, and we always have to remember that it's Parliament who represents the people. Government is meant to do what Parliament instructs it to do. Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question, and there was one down here at the front.
Thank you, Leoncini from the University of Ioannina. Actually, in a way, you've answered. Well, thank you first of all for the lovely lecture and very vivid one. You know, very inspiring. And but actually, in a way, you answered with I have a criticism on your criticism. Well, I have a remark. Well, I disagree a bit with on your criticism on the first part of your lecture regarding the evils, so-called, of representative democracy and referendums, in the sense that we do know, of course, that that liberal representative democracies, well, and Britain, of course, is the oldest British representative democracy, right? Have the problem that, of course, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau said back then, and it often makes British headlines, newspaper headlines, actually, that the English people, he said, think they're free, but they're only free at the moment that they vote, right? So, of course, that's a paradox of democracy, that of course you give out your sovereignty, if you see what I mean, your freedom to the governing body, as you quite rightly said. So I don't, well, to the government that is going to be elected. This is what I mean. To the elected government. So I don't understand really why this is a problem. Why referendums are problematic. According to the first line of your argument, you quoted Winston Churchill is the best as we have, and I'm sure you're familiar with Richard Wollheim's paradoxes of democracy. One of them is that, of course, there's always going to be a minority that, of course, democracy is supposed to, of course, protect the rule of the majority, but it's always to be an unsatisfied majority. So, of course, I completely I agree with what you said on education, the importance of especially of an educated public in humanities, but nevertheless I was, I'm sorry, but yeah.
Okay.
But you answered yourself by answering the last question, so that's why it made my question redundant somehow.
No. Two interesting points there. So in terms of, I tried to make it clear that I did not think that a ballot on a particular day was the only function in a democracy. I said it was a very, very important part of democracy, but democracy is an ongoing conversation, not just a one-off shout. Because democracy is based on civic and human rights, those who lost in any debate, in any vote, still have a right to speak afterwards. The opposition in any government, it's their job to try to critique and indeed depose the government from the very next day. That's how democracy works, through that kind of dialogue, debate, challenge. So the conversation goes on. The vote is crucial, but it's not the only thing. I don't think you give away your freedom in that vote. That's not quite how I would phrase it. Yes, you are asking you are electing a local member of parliament to represent you, but that's not the end of your democratic civic duties and rights. In terms of the referendum, I still maintain that referenda, though they can be very useful to give advice to governments and parliaments, they do run the risk that you can make decisions before there has been a period for accurately informed, reflective debate. Now, I'm not pretending that every debate in Parliament is accurately informed or reflective. Some of them are very poor, some laws are very badly made, but at least there is the chance in laws, in lawmaking, in parliaments, for that debate, for that reflection, for the advice of dreaded experts to be consulted. So I stand by my view that referenda are not nearly as democratic as they first appear. And the second point is, you know, I stand by that referenda tend to make decisions for many years to come, including for people who were too young even to have the vote when the decision was made. So in that sense, they seem to me rather less democratic. But they have a role. They have a role. But thank you. Thank you very much.
Angie just referred to an ongoing conversation, and I hope that you will all join us for a reception outside following her talk. I'm very pleased to say and to thank the Kokotos winery for providing the refreshments for that reception. But before we move on and continue the conversation and the discussion, let's thank her once again for a very stimulating and thought-provoking lecture. Thank you.